Sergeant Marcus Williams stood at the back of the crowded auditorium, his dress blue uniform crisp and spotless despite the sweltering June heat that had settled over the small Georgia town. The gymnasium of Millbrook High School buzzed with excitement as families filled every available seat, cameras flashing and proud voices calling out to soon-to-be graduates. Marcus checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The ceremony would begin soon, and his son David would walk across that stage to receive his diploma. After 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq, Marcus had missed too many of his son's milestones. Soccer games, school plays, birthday parties. The military had demanded sacrifices that every service member's family understood but never truly accepted. But not today. Today, nothing would keep him from watching David graduate as valedictorian of his class. Marcus had driven 12 hours straight from Camp Lejeune, still in his uniform because there hadn't been time to change. His wife Sarah had saved him a seat in the 3rd row, right behind the Johnsons, whose daughter was also graduating. As he made his way down the aisle, nodding politely to neighbors and other parents, Marcus felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with his own military achievements. His son had earned a full scholarship to Georgia Tech, despite the challenges of being a military kid who had moved 6 times before high school. The overhead lights dimmed slightly as the school principal stepped up to the podium. Parents began settling into their seats, programs rustling as they located their children's names in the list of graduates. Marcus was almost to his row when a firm hand landed on his shoulder. "Excuse me, sir?" The voice belonged to a man in his 50s, wearing a polo shirt and khakis that looked expensive despite the casual style. His face was red with irritation, and his grip on Marcus's shoulder was unnecessarily tight. "I think there's been some confusion." Marcus turned, keeping his expression neutral, despite the uncomfortable feeling growing in his stomach. "I'm sorry. Is there a problem?" "This section is reserved for families of graduates," the man said loudly enough that several nearby parents turned to look. "I don't think you understand how things work here." Sarah Williams looked up from her seat, her face already showing the embarrassment and anger that Marcus recognized from similar situations they had faced over the years. She stood quickly, her voice carrying a slight tremor. "Honey, your seat is right here. I saved it for you." The man's eyes shifted between Marcus and Sarah, his confusion evident for just a moment before his expression hardened again. "Look, I don't know what kind of game you people are playing, but this isn't the place for it. There are procedures here, and we can't have just anyone walking into our children's graduation ceremony." "Anyone?" Marcus repeated quietly, his training keeping his voice level despite the rage building inside him. He had faced down enemy fire, insurgents, and roadside bombs, but nothing had prepared him for the humiliation of being treated like a threat at his own son's graduation. More parents were turning to stare now, some with curiosity, others with dawning understanding of what was happening. Mrs. Brasti Patterson, who had taught David in 3rd grade, stood up from her seat 2 rows ahead. "Marcus? Marcus Williams? Oh my goodness, you made it!" But the man in the polo shirt stepped closer, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a reasonable tone. "I'm sure you're a nice person, but this is a private school event. If you're looking for the public school ceremony, I believe that's at the community center downtown." "Sir," Marcus said, his hands clenched at his sides, "I'm here to watch my son graduate, David Williams. He's the valedictorian." "Right," the man scoffed. "And I suppose you're in the military too? Is that some kind of costume?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, the conversations had stopped entirely. Even the school staff setting up the stage had paused to watch the confrontation unfold. Sarah moved to stand beside her husband, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This is my husband," she said firmly. "Sergeant Marcus Williams, United States Marine Corps. He has served 5 tours overseas defending this country. and he has every right to be here watching our son graduate." The man looked between them again, skepticism written across his face. "Look, lady, I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but it's not going to work here. We know our community, and we know our military families. This man doesn't belong here." Marcus felt something break inside him. Not snap with anger, but break with the weight of disappointment and recognition. This wasn't the first time his presence had been questioned. His right to belong challenged by people who couldn't see past the color of his skin. But it was the first time it had happened in uniform, at his son's graduation, in front of the entire community where his family had tried to build a life. "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus said quietly. "My son is graduating today. I've missed too many important moments in his life because I was serving this country. I won't miss this one." The man's face grew redder. "Look, I'm being patient here, but I'm going to have to call security. You're disrupting our ceremony and making people uncomfortable. This is a family event for our community, and you need to respect that." "Our community?" Marcus repeated. "My family has lived here for 2 years. My wife volunteers at the food bank every Saturday. My son has been on the honor roll every semester. What exactly makes you think we're not part of this community?" The auditorium had grown completely silent now, except for the distant sound of graduates lining up in the hallway outside. The principal had noticed the commotion and was making his way down from the stage, looking concerned about the delay. Other parents were pulling out phones, some to record the confrontation, others to call for help. "I'm not having this argument with you," the man said, pulling out his own phone. "Security will sort this out. You can explain to them why you think you have the right to disrupt our children's special day." Marcus stood perfectly still, his military training taking over as it always did in moments of crisis. He assessed the situation, counted potential exits, noted the positions of possible allies and threats. But for the first time in his military career, he wasn't sure what the right tactical decision was. Fighting back would only prove their point about him being a threat. Leaving would mean missing David's moment and teaching his son that sometimes backing down was the only option. Sarah grabbed his arm gently. "We could sit in the back," she whispered, "just until this gets sorted out." "No," Marcus said softly but firmly. "David saved these seats for us. He's been looking forward to seeing us in the front row. I won't let this man's ignorance steal that from him." The man with the phone was already dialing when the main doors of the auditorium burst open. The sound echoed through the silent space like a gunshot, causing everyone to turn toward the entrance. The overhead lights caught the polished buttons and badges of 6 men in dress uniforms walking in formation down the center aisle. They moved with the unmistakable precision of elite military personnel, their faces serious and focused. The lead man, a tall figure with graying temples and chest full of ribbons, surveyed the scene with the quick efficiency of someone accustomed to rapid threat assessment. His eyes locked onto Marcus, then shifted to the man with the phone, then back to Marcus again. The silence in the auditorium deepened as every person present recognized that something significant was about to happen. The man with the phone slowly lowered his hand, the call forgotten, as 6 Navy SEALs continued their approach toward the confrontation that had brought their brother's graduation ceremony to a complete standstill. The 6 men approached with measured steps, their polished shoes clicking against the gymnasium floor in perfect synchronization. Each wore the distinctive dress blue uniform of the United States Navy, their chests decorated with ribbons that spoke of battles fought in distant waters and covert operations that would never make the evening news. The trident pin on each uniform gleamed under the auditorium lights, the mark of Navy SEALs, America's most elite maritime special operations force. Commander James Mitchell led the group, his weathered face bearing the quiet confidence of a man who had led troops through the most dangerous missions imaginable. Behind him walked 5 other warriors, each carrying himself with the same deadly calm that comes from years of training in the world's most challenging environments. They had driven 4 hours from Naval Station Norfolk after receiving a text message that simply read, "Need backup. David's graduation. Trouble." The message had come from Marcus Williams, a Marine they had served alongside during a joint operation in Helmand Province 3 years earlier. When insurgents had pinned down Marcus's reconnaissance team, Mitchell's SEAL squad had been the quick reaction force that fought through enemy fire to extract them. They had spent 2 weeks together in that forward operating base, sharing meals, stories, and the unique bond that forms between warriors who have faced death together. As the SEALs moved down the aisle, conversations throughout the auditorium stopped entirely. Parents who moments earlier had been whispering about the confrontation now stared in amazement at the display of military precision entering their small-town graduation ceremony. Children pointed excitedly at the uniforms, while veterans in the audience straightened unconsciously in their seats. The man in the polo shirt, who had been so confident in his authority just moments before, seemed to shrink as the SEALs approached. His phone remained halfway to his ear, the emergency call he had been placing forgotten as 6 of the most dangerous men in the American military focused their attention on the situation he had created. Commander Mitchell stopped directly in front of Marcus, coming to attention with the sharp precision that marked him as career military. His voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Sergeant Williams," he said formally, extending his hand, "congratulations on your son's achievement. We're honored to be here for David's graduation." Marcus shook the offered hand, his face showing the first smile he had managed since entering the auditorium. "Commander Mitchell, I didn't expect to see you here, sir. Wouldn't miss it for the world, Marine. We were in the area for training exercises when we got your message." Mitchell's eyes shifted to the man in the polo shirt, who was now looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Is there some kind of problem here?" The man tried to regain his composure, but his voice cracked slightly as he spoke. There was some confusion about seating arrangements. This is a private event for families of graduates." Senior Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, a stocky man with scars on his hands from explosive ordnance disposal work, stepped forward. His voice carried the slightest hint of a Spanish accent and absolutely no patience for what he was hearing. "Confusion?" Rodriguez repeated. "What exactly is confusing about a father attending his son's graduation? Sergeant Williams served 5 combat tours protecting the freedoms that allow you to hold events like this. His son earned his place here just like every other graduate." The polo-shirted man looked around desperately, searching for support from other parents who had been watching the confrontation. But the presence of 6 Navy SEALs had completely changed the dynamic in the auditorium. Suddenly, no one seemed willing to challenge the military heroes who had clearly come to support their fellow serviceman. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," the man backpedaled. "I was just trying to help direct people to the right seats. Sometimes visitors get confused about where they're supposed to sit." Petty Officer First Class Thompson, the youngest of the SEALs, spoke up with barely controlled anger. "Visitors? This man isn't a visitor. He's a United States Marine whose son is the valedictorian of this graduating class. What exactly made you think he didn't belong here?" The question hung in the air with the weight of an accusation. Everyone in the auditorium knew exactly what had made the man assume Marcus didn't belong, but no one was willing to say it out loud. The silence stretched until Mrs. Patterson, David's former third-grade teacher, stood up from her seat. "Marcus Williams is one of the finest men I've ever had the privilege to know," she said clearly. "His son David is brilliant, kind, and hard-working, everything any parent would want their child to be. This family belongs here more than anyone else in this auditorium." Her words seemed to break the spell that had fallen over the crowd. Other parents began standing, some approaching Marcus to shake his hand and apologize for the treatment he had received. The principal, who had been watching from the stage, hurried down to personally escort the Williams family to their seats. But Commander Mitchell wasn't finished with the man who had created the problem. He approached him with the same measured steps he used when walking point on dangerous missions, his voice dropping to the low, deadly tone he reserved for enemy combatants. "I want to make sure I understand the situation correctly," Mitchell said. "You saw a United States Marine in dress uniform attending his son's graduation, and your first instinct was to assume he didn't belong here and needed to be removed. Is that an accurate assessment?" The man's face had gone pale. "Look, I made a mistake. Can't we just move on? The ceremony is supposed to start." "A mistake," repeated Chief Warrant Officer Barnes, whose massive frame and heavily muscled arms bore tattoos commemorating fallen teammates. "Is that what you call it when you humiliate a war hero in front of his community? When you try to deny a father the right to watch his son graduate?" Around them, the auditorium buzzed with conversation as word spread about what had happened. Parents were taking pictures of the SEALs, texting their friends about the military heroes who had arrived to support one of their own. The man in the polo shirt found himself increasingly isolated as the community he claimed to represent began to turn against him. "I think an apology is in order," said Master Chief Davis, whose weathered hands bore the calluses of a man who had spent decades handling weapons and rappelling from helicopters. "Sergeant Williams served his country with honor. His family deserves nothing but respect and gratitude from the community they've chosen to call home." The man looked around one more time, desperately seeking an escape from the situation he had created. But everywhere he looked, he saw faces that reflected disappointment in his behavior. Finally, he turned back to Marcus, his voice barely above a whisper. "I apologize," he said. "I was wrong to question your right to be here. I'm sorry for the disruption I caused." Marcus nodded stiffly, his training preventing him from accepting the apology with any real warmth. "Apology accepted." Commander Mitchell placed a protective hand on Marcus's shoulder. "We'll be staying for the ceremony," he announced to the auditorium at large. "We wouldn't dream of missing the chance to see the son of one of America's finest Marines receive his diploma." As the SEALs took seats around the Williams family, forming a protective perimeter that no one would dare to challenge, the gymnasium erupted in spontaneous applause. Veterans throughout the audience stood and saluted, while children waved excitedly at the warriors who had transformed their school ceremony into something extraordinary. The man in the polo shirt slipped quietly toward the exit, his face burning with shame as he realized that his prejudice had not only been wrong, but had been witnessed and condemned by 6 of America's most elite warriors. Behind him, the Williams family finally took their seats in the 3rd row, surrounded by newfound friends and protected by brothers in arms who had traveled across state lines to ensure that no one would deny a good man the right to watch his son succeed. The principal returned to the podium with a renewed sense of purpose, his voice carrying more authority than it had all evening. The presence of 6 Navy SEALs in his auditorium had reminded everyone that this was supposed to be a celebration of achievement, not a platform for prejudice. As he called for the ceremony to begin, the entire atmosphere in the gymnasium had transformed from one of tension to one of genuine excitement and pride. David Williams stood in the hallway with his fellow graduates, adjusting his cap and trying to calm his nerves before delivering the valedictorian speech he had spent weeks preparing. Through the small windows in the doors, he could see the crowd settling into their seats, but he had no idea that his father had just survived a confrontation that could have denied him the chance to witness this moment. The processional music began, and 847 graduates filed into the auditorium in alphabetical order. David, as valedictorian, would be the last to enter and the first to speak. As his classmates found their seats on the stage, David caught sight of his parents in the 3rd row and froze. His father was there as promised, but surrounded by 6 men in military uniforms whose presence commanded the attention of the entire auditorium. Sarah Williams noticed her son's confused expression and gave him a thumbs-up sign, mouthing the words, "Tell you later," with a smile that didn't quite hide the emotional toll of the evening's events. Marcus sat perfectly straight in his seat, his pride in his son evident to everyone around him, while Commander Mitchell and his team maintained the respectful attention due to any important ceremony. When David's name was called to deliver his speech, the auditorium erupted in applause that lasted longer than for any other part of the ceremony. The young man approached the podium with the same confident bearing his father had displayed under pressure, though he still had no idea what his family had just endured. "Fellow graduates, families, faculty, and honored guests," David began, his voice clear and strong. "Tonight we celebrate not just the end of our high school journey, but the beginning of our next chapter as contributing members of society." As David spoke about overcoming challenges, pursuing excellence, and serving others, Marcus felt tears threatening his eyes for the first time since his deployment in Afghanistan. His son's words about resilience and standing up for what was right carried special meaning after the evening's events. "My father taught me that true strength isn't about avoiding difficult situations," David continued, "but about facing them with dignity and courage. Whether you're serving your country overseas or simply standing up for your neighbor who's being treated unfairly, the measure of a person is found in the moments when doing the right thing costs you something." Commander Mitchell leaned over to Marcus and whispered, "That boy has your backbone, Marine. You should be proud." The speech concluded to thunderous applause, and as David returned to his seat, he caught his father's eye and gave him a small nod of gratitude. Somehow, without knowing the details, he understood that his father had faced a challenge tonight and emerged victorious. The remainder of the ceremony proceeded without incident, though the man in the polo shirt was notably absent. As graduates filed across the stage to receive their diplomas, several parents approached the Williams family to introduce themselves and express their admiration for Marcus's service. Mrs. Henderson, whose son played football with David, tearfully apologized for not speaking up earlier. "I should have said something when I saw what was happening," she said. "I was raised better than to stay silent when someone is being treated unfairly." Master Chief Davis, overhearing the conversation, offered her a gentle smile. "The important thing is that you recognize it now. That's how communities grow stronger, by learning from difficult moments and choosing to do better next time." When David Williams finally walked across the stage to receive his diploma, the entire auditorium rose to their feet. The applause was deafening, not just for his academic achievement, but for what his family represented: service, sacrifice, and the pursuit of the American dream, despite facing obstacles that should never exist. After the ceremony concluded, families gathered on the school lawn for photos and celebration. The SEALs formed an informal receiving line, each taking time to shake David's hand and congratulate him on his achievement. Young children from other families approached shyly, asking the warriors about their uniforms and service, turning the evening into an impromptu lesson about military service and sacrifice. David finally learned the full story of what had happened from his mother, his face darkening with anger before shifting to gratitude as he looked at the men who had driven 4 hours to support his family. "You didn't have to do that," he said to Commander Mitchell, "but I'm glad you did. Not just for my dad, but for everyone who saw what happened tonight." "Son," Mitchell replied, placing a fatherly hand on the young man's shoulder, "when good people stand by and do nothing, bad people think they can get away with anything. Your father served with distinction in some of the most dangerous places on earth. The least we could do was make sure he could watch his son graduate in peace." As the evening wound down, several unexpected things happened that would change the community forever. Principal Anderson approached Marcus privately to apologize for the incident and to offer him a position on the school board's diversity committee. 3 local business owners who had witnessed the evening's events, approached him about job opportunities for when his military service ended. Most surprisingly, the man in the polo shirt returned to the parking lot as families were leaving. He approached Marcus hesitantly, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine shame. "Sergeant Williams," he said quietly, "I wanted to apologize again, but more specifically this time. What I did tonight wasn't about seating or procedures. It was about assumptions I made based on your race, and that was wrong. I've lived in this town my whole life, but tonight I learned that I don't really know my community at all." He extended his hand, which Marcus accepted after a moment's hesitation. "I hope your son knows how lucky he is to have a father like you, and I hope someday you might give me the chance to prove that tonight wasn't representative of who I want to be." Marcus nodded slowly. "We all have opportunities to do better. What matters is what you do with this one." As the Williams family drove home that night, Sarah in the passenger seat and David in the back still wearing his graduation cap, Marcus reflected on the evening's events. What had started as potential humiliation had become a powerful reminder that he was not alone in his fight for respect and dignity. "Dad," David said from the back seat, "I meant what I said in my speech about standing up for what's right. Tonight you showed me what that actually looks like." Commander Mitchell and his team had already begun their drive back to Norfolk, but not before making plans to attend David's college graduation in 4 years. The bond between warriors extends beyond service, creating a network of support that spans decades and distance. The story of what happened at Millbrook High School that night spread quickly through social media and local news, becoming a powerful example of how military brotherhood transcends individual service branches and how communities can choose to grow from their mistakes rather than ignore them. 6 months later, Marcus Williams would retire from the Marine Corps and accept a position with a local veterans advocacy organization. David would maintain a perfect GPA at Georgia Tech while volunteering with programs that help military children adjust to civilian life. And the Millbrook community would implement new diversity training programs, ensuring that no family would ever again face the humiliation that had almost derailed one of their proudest moments. The man in the polo shirt, whose name was Robert Clayton, would become one of the program's most dedicated volunteers, spending his weekends helping military families navigate the challenges of small-town integration. Sometimes the most powerful transformations come from the most uncomfortable moments, when people are forced to confront their own prejudices and choose whether to defend them or overcome them. On David's desk in his college dorm room sits a photograph from that graduation night. 7 men in military uniforms standing with their arms around each other's shoulders, representing different branches of service but united by a common commitment to protecting those who serve alongside them. It serves as a daily reminder that courage comes in many forms, and sometimes the most important battles are fought not against foreign enemies, but against the prejudice and ignorance that threaten the values they all swore to defend.